6 words. That's all it took to shatter my father's entire world. I'm watching him from 3 rows back at Fort Braxton's officer ceremony. Colonel Thaddeus Lane retired sitting ramrod straight in his dress blues medals catching the afternoon light, completely unaware that his disappointment of a daughter, the one he's mocked for 22 years, is about to be revealed as America's most classified weapon. The irony isn't lost on me. Here I sit in a plain uniform, no ribbons, no rank insignia, looking exactly like what he's always seen me as unremarkable. Just another face in the crowd of 300 military personnel packed into Fort Braxton's ceremonial hall. General Remington Blackwood steps to the podium, his weathered face carved from years of making decisions that shape nations. His voice cuts through the polite murmur. Before we conclude today's ceremony, there's one final recognition that requires immediate attention. The room shifts. This wasn't on the program. I watch my father's shoulders straighten. Beside him, my brother Garrison adjusts his tie nervously. We need a ghost walker in the room. The words hang in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. My father's head turns left then right, searching the crowd with tactical awareness. Garrison's eyes narrow, scanning faces. 300 military personnel crane their necks searching for this legendary operative they've all heard whispers about. The Ghost Walker, the phantom linguist who prevented 5 international conflicts, the cultural specialist who extracted assets from impossible situations using nothing but dialect recognition and psychological profiling, the invisible weapon who spoke 9 languages and moved through hostile territories like smoke through a keyhole. They're all looking for someone who doesn't exist in their expectations. Someone tall, imposing, probably male, definitely intimidating. Then I stand up. The movement is deliberate, controlled, exactly as I've been trained. No sudden gestures, no dramatic flourishes. Just a quiet woman in row 3, seat 7, rising from her chair with the kind of calm that comes from walking through minefields. The recognition doesn't come immediately. My father blinks twice, his brain struggling to process what his eyes are telling him. The woman standing 30 feet away looks exactly like his youngest child, the one who spent her teenage years with foreign language dictionaries, the one who chose words over weapons books, over bullets. But that can't be right. Because that would mean the color drains from his face like water from a broken dam. His mouth opens slightly, then closes, then opens again without producing sound. For the first time in my adult life, Colonel Thaddeus Lane is speechless. Garrison's reaction is different, but no less profound. He grips the chair, arms knuckles white, as if the ground beneath him has become unreliable. "What the hell?" he whispers loud enough for people around to hear. I begin walking down the aisle. Each step echoes in the sudden silence, my regulation shoes clicking against polished marble. The sound seems impossibly loud in a room full of people holding their breath. Because none of them expected Ghostwalker to look like me. A woman, 5'6", unremarkable brown hair pulled back in a simple bun. No visible scars, no intimidating presence. But the people who matter, the ones with the highest clearance levels, the ones who've read after-action reports with my code name, scattered through paragraphs of redacted text, they're not confused. They're standing at attention. Colonel Martinez from Defense Intelligence, Major General Peterson from Special Operations Command, Director Chen from the National Security Agency. One by one they rise from their seats, spines straight, eyes forward. A silent acknowledgement that reverberates through the room like ripples in still water. My father watches this happen, his confusion deepening with each officer who stands. This is military protocol he's lived by his entire adult life, and he recognizes profound respect when he sees it. But he can't reconcile what's happening with what he thinks he knows about his daughter. I reach the front where General Blackwood waits. He doesn't smile, doesn't offer congratulations. He simply nods once, a gesture that communicates more respect than a dozen speeches. In our world, recognition isn't about applause. It's about acknowledgement between professionals who understand the weight of invisible service. I turn to face the room. 300 faces stare back, ranging from profound respect to complete bewilderment. In the third row, my family sits frozen. My father's face has progressed beyond pale to something approaching gray. Garrison looks like he's been physically struck. But sitting there watching his shock, watching him struggle to process that his greatest disappointment is standing at the front of a room full of America's military elite, I realize something that makes my chest tighten with vindication and heartbreak. He has no idea he's staring at his greatest victim. Because what my father doesn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, as he sits there in his dress blues medals earned through decades of honorable service, is that he's the reason I almost died 6 months ago in a Syrian desert bleeding into sand while enemy fighters closed in on my position. My own father signed the papers that put a target on my back, and right now he's sitting 30 feet away applauding the daughter he tried to get killed in the name of keeping her safe. You see, while my father was sitting in that ceremony thinking he was watching some stranger get honored, I was staring at the man who signed my death warrant. 6 months ago, Syria, Operation Nightingale. I was embedded with Delta Force as their cultural liaison and linguistic specialist, which sounds clean until you're crouched behind concrete barriers while automatic weapons fire chips away at your cover. We were 40 kilometers outside Aleppo, officially coordinating humanitarian aid. Unofficially extracting a high-value asset, a former Syrian intelligence officer who'd been feeding us information about arms trafficking networks for 18 months. The kind of intelligence that prevents American weapons from ending up in terrorist hands. I'd been in country for 2 weeks, building relationships with local intermediaries, mapping the cultural landscape my team would need to navigate. It's delicate work requiring understanding, not just what people say, but what they don't say, what their silence means, how their body language translates across cultural boundaries. Everything proceeded according to plan, until the radio crackled with a voice that turned my blood to ice water. "We know you're there, Serafina." Not my code name, not my operational identity, my real name. The name only a handful of people with the highest security clearances were supposed to know in connection with this mission. Staff Sergeant Martinez, crouched beside me in our observation post, went rigid. "How the hell do they know your name?" he hissed, weapon already raised. I didn't answer because I was processing the implications. In our line of work, operational security isn't just about mission success, it's about survival. When your real identity gets compromised in hostile territory, you don't just fail the mission. You die, usually slowly, after providing enemy interrogators with every classified piece of information they can extract. The next 30 minutes unraveled with precision that only comes from someone on the inside providing detailed intelligence to the wrong people. Our safe house was hit, first the backup location only 3 people knew about. Then our primary extraction point was compromised, forcing us into a running firefight through narrow streets filled with civilians. Martinez took the first bullet meant for me, his body armor absorbing most impact, but not all. The second shot shattered concrete inches from my head, sending razor-sharp fragments across my cheek. By the time we fought our way to the emergency rendezvous, half our team was wounded, and our asset had disappeared into Syrian streets, with 3 years of carefully cultivated intelligence evaporating like morning mist. But we were alive, barely. It wasn't until 3 days later, safe in a German military hospital, while Martinez underwent surgery to remove shrapnel from his shoulder, that I learned the real scope of the betrayal. The investigation began immediately. Digital forensics teams combed through communication logs, encryption specialists analyzed signal intercepts, counterintelligence officers built timeline matrices to identify potential breach sources. What they found was worse than enemy infiltration. The breach had come from inside our own systems through a backdoor in the encryption framework governing our operational communications. Someone with legitimate access had created a vulnerability, then either used it themselves or allowed hostile actors to exploit it. The digital signature on the backdoor authorization led to a contract approval buried in 18 months of routine paperwork. Project Alto, a seemingly mundane upgrade to tactical communication encryption approved through the Defense Intelligence Agency's contractor vetting process. And there, in a stack of technical specifications and security certifications, was a signature I recognized with the kind of shock that rewrites your understanding of reality in a single moment. Colonel Thaddeus Lane, Technical Advisor, Encryption Systems Review Board. My father. The man who'd spent 22 years telling me my language skills were useless, that my interest in cultural analysis was worthless, that I'd never amount to anything in real national security work, had signed off on the very system that nearly got me killed in Syria. But it gets worse. As I dug deeper into the paper trail using access methods I'd learned in places that don't appear on any official map, I discovered my father wasn't the only family member involved. The contractor recommendation for Redshore Analytics, the company that implemented the backdoor system, had come through military channels, specifically through a lieutenant colonel in Special Operations Command who had personal knowledge of DIA communication requirements and had vouched for Redshore's technical capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel Garrison Lane. My brother. So there I was, sitting in a German military hospital with bandages covering cuts on my face, and the knowledge that both my father and brother had played roles in nearly getting me killed. Not through malice, I would later learn, but through something almost worse, misguided protection that had turned into maximum danger. The investigation revealed a pattern. Every time I'd been pulled from high-risk assignments, reassigned to safer positions, relegated to desk analysis when I should have been in the field, it hadn't been random bureaucracy. It had been deliberate sabotage, orchestrated by people who thought they were protecting me. They'd created monitoring capabilities to track my deployments, raise security concerns, find bureaucratic ways to keep me out of harm's way. Love expressed through control protection, manifested as sabotage. Family loyalty wrapped in military procedure, and they had no idea that the very systems they'd implemented to watch over me had been compromised by hostile actors who'd turned their protection into a weapon. The ceremony is ending now. In 5 minutes, I'm going to face them both and explain how love became betrayal, how protection became danger, and how the family that was supposed to keep me safe nearly got me killed instead. Conference room, I say, nodding toward a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Now. It's not a request. For the first time in my relationship with these two men, I'm setting the terms controlling the conversation. The shift in power dynamics is subtle, but unmistakable. The conference room is small windowless, designed for sensitive conversations. An oval table dominates the center, surrounded by chairs that have hosted briefings on operations that reshaped global politics. I close the door and activate the white noise generator, providing acoustic cover for words that are about to change everything between us. My father and brother take seats across from me, an unconscious arrangement that puts them on one side and me on the other. Family versus outsider. The people who've always belonged versus the one who had to earn her place through blood and expertise. Except now they're learning the dynamics they've always assumed were completely wrong. So, Garrison says, attempting casual conversation. Ghostwalker. That's really you. I study his face, looking for pride or respect. Instead, I see confusion, discomfort, and something that looks like resentment, as if my success is an inconvenience rather than an accomplishment. For the past 8 years, I reply, keeping my voice professional. Since 6 months after graduating from DIA's Advanced Linguistic Program, the program you both called a waste of time. My father shifts metals, catching fluorescent light. We never said it was a waste. 9 languages won't make you a soldier. I quote, letting his own words hang between us. You said that at my college graduation, in front of my ROTC instructors. In front of classmates who'd spent 4 years respecting my abilities, while you spent 4 years dismissing them. The silence is broken only by the white noise generator's electronic whisper. I can see memory working behind my father's eyes, trying to reconcile the daughter he remembers with the woman sitting across from him. You have to understand, he says finally, we were concerned about your safety, concerned about my safety. The words come out harder than intended, carrying 8 years of suppressed frustration and 6 months of betrayal. Let me tell you about your concern. I pull out my phone, opening the encrypted file I've been carrying since the investigation concluded. Photos that shouldn't exist, documents that will never see official light, evidence of a conspiracy that nearly cost me everything. Project Alto, I say, sliding the phone across so they can see the screen. Communication encryption upgrade approved 18 months ago. Your signature, Dad, right there on line 47. He leans forward, squinting at the document. I remember this. Routine contractor approval. I signed dozens of these during my consulting period. Routine? I repeat. Do you know what that routine approval did? It created a backdoor in DIA's tactical communication systems, a vulnerability that allowed hostile actors to intercept operational intelligence, including the real names and locations of classified assets operating in denied areas. Garrison's face has gone pale. He understands military terminology, grasps the implications of compromised communications in hostile territory. Sarah, you're not suggesting... I'm not suggesting anything, I interrupt. I'm telling you exactly what happened. 6 months ago, Syria, Operation Nightingale. Enemy forces knew my real name, knew my location, knew my extraction timeline. They had information that should have been impossible for them to acquire. I take the phone back, swiping to the next image. The investigation traced the breach to your routine approval, Dad. The contract you signed without proper vetting the system you authorized without understanding its vulnerabilities. That's impossible, he says, but his voice lacks conviction. You would never intentionally compromise your daughter's safety. I finish for him. I know that, but intention doesn't stop bullets. Intention doesn't keep enemy interrogators from knowing exactly who they're looking for. I swipe to the next image, a hospital photo I've never shown anyone. Staff Sergeant Martinez in a German medical facility, his shoulder wrapped in bandages, his face gray with pain and blood loss. This is Martinez. Good soldier, good man, married with 2 kids in Tennessee. He took bullets meant for me because someone on the inside gave enemy forces the intelligence they needed to set up the perfect ambush. Both men stare at the photo, the reality of consequences becoming impossible to ignore. But wait, I say, pulling up the final document. There's more, because your signature wasn't the only family involvement. Garrison recognizes his own handwriting before I explain. A recommendation memo sent through Special Operations Command channels, vouching for Redshore Analytics' technical capabilities. You recommended the contractor, I tell him. You put their name forward for consideration. You told the approval board they were trustworthy, reliable, suitable for classified work. I was trying to protect you, he says, words rushing out. They told us they could implement monitoring systems, early warning capabilities for high-risk assets. I thought if we could track your deployments, get advance notice when you were being sent into dangerous situations, you could sabotage my career to keep me safe. I finish. You could manipulate mission assignments, create bureaucratic obstacles, find ways to keep your disappointing little sister out of harm's way. Neither denies it, which is confirmation enough. It wasn't sabotage, my father says quietly. It was protection. You're the only daughter I have left. After losing your mother. Don't. The word cuts sharp. Don't you dare use Mom's death as an excuse for what you've done to my life. Then my father says something that breaks my heart in a way anger never could. I'd rather have you hate me than attend your funeral. The words hit like a physical blow, carrying decades of grief over my mother's death, years of terror at the thought of losing another family member, and the desperate logic of a man who's convinced that love means control and protection means diminishment. For the first time since this conversation began, I see him not as the colonel who dismissed my achievements or the consultant who compromised my safety, but as a father who's been so paralyzed by the fear of loss that he's been willing to destroy what he loves to keep it safe. Garrison breaks first, his military composure cracking like ice under pressure. Sarah, you have to understand what it was like after Mom died. His voice carries grief that none of us have ever properly processed, the kind of loss that reshapes a family's foundation. I was 17. He continues, staring at his hands. One day, she was complaining about being tired, and 6 months later, we were standing around her hospital bed watching machines breathe for her. And Dad, he glances at our father, whose face has gone gray with remembered pain. Dad just shut down. I want to maintain the anger sustaining me through this confrontation, but something in Garrison's voice stops me. This isn't deflection. This is truth I've never heard about what happened to our family after Lupus took our mother away. He couldn't handle losing her, Garrison says. For months he'd sit in her chair at dinner just staring at her empty place. He stopped eating, sleeping, talking about anything that wasn't strictly necessary. I thought we were going to lose him too. My father's hands have stopped shaking, but his breathing has become deliberate, controlled the way someone breathes when fighting overwhelming emotion. Then you started spending all your time with those language books and that radio, Garrison continues, and Dad became convinced that you were escaping into some fantasy world where you could talk to people who weren't there, where you could build relationships that couldn't hurt you, the way losing Mom had hurt all of us. But that's not what I was doing, I say, my voice quieter now, some anger bleeding out as I begin to understand the fear driving their actions. I was learning. I was preparing myself for something bigger than our house, something beyond the grief suffocating all of us. We know that now, my father says, speaking for the first time since his devastating admission. But then I just saw my daughter disappearing into books and foreign voices, getting further away from anything I could understand or protect. He straightens in his chair, some military bearing returning, as he forces himself to meet my eyes directly. When your mother was dying, she made me promise to take care of you and Garrison. But I didn't know how to take care of someone whose needs I couldn't identify, whose dreams I couldn't comprehend, whose strength I couldn't measure by any standard I'd been taught to recognize. The admission costs him something visible, like he's breaking protocol by revealing operational weakness to potential adversaries. But I'm not his adversary anymore, despite the anger that brought us into this room. So, you decided to keep me small, I say, but without the edge of accusation that's been sharpening my words. You thought if I never got too big, never reached too far, never took risks that matched my abilities, then I'd never get hurt the way Mom got hurt. It sounds insane when you say it like that, Garrison admits. But yeah, essentially. We thought we could manage your exposure to risk, create a safe zone around your life where bad things wouldn't be able to reach you. But that's not how life works, I point out. And it's definitely not how military service works. Risk is inherent in what we do. The goal isn't to eliminate it, it's to manage it through training, preparation, and professional competence. We know that for ourselves, my father says. We've spent our careers accepting calculated risks, making decisions that put us in harm's way for the mission and the greater good. But when it came to you... He trails off, unable to finish, but I understand what he can't say. When it came to me, professional judgment was overruled by parental terror. Military logic was subordinated to the need to keep safe the last piece of his wife that remained in the world. The worst part, I tell them, is that you were both so focused on keeping me away from danger that you never noticed I was actually good at handling it. Every language I learned made me more capable, not more vulnerable. Every cultural skill I developed made me safer in the field, not less prepared for reality. I pull up another file on my phone, combat footage from Afghanistan, grainy and shaking, showing a woman in tactical gear calmly negotiating with armed militants while explosions echo in the background. This is me in Kandahar 3 years ago, I say, sliding the phone across. That dialect you're hearing, it's a regional variation of Pashto that most interpreters don't recognize. The militants thought they were speaking in code planning to execute the hostages they were holding. Both men lean forward, studying the screen with the intensity of people watching their fundamental assumptions being dismantled in real time. 7 American contractors went home to their families because I understood that violence has a language too, and sometimes the most powerful weapon you can deploy is the right word spoken in the right dialect at the right moment. My father looks up from the phone, his face showing something I've never seen when he looks at me, genuine professional respect, mixed with a dawning understanding of what he's been too afraid to see. "You want to know when I became Ghost Walker?" I ask, settling back into my chair with a different dynamic between us. I'm not the defendant anymore. I'm the professional briefing civilian consultants on operational realities they need to understand. It started the day after Mom's funeral when I was 14 years old, and you both retreated so far into your grief that I might as well have been orphaned. The words are harsh, but they're not weapons anymore. They're context, the foundation we need if we're going to have any kind of relationship moving forward. I'd come downstairs for breakfast and you'd both be gone. I continue looking at Garrison. You'd left for school or PT or wherever 17-year-old boys go to avoid dealing with emotion. And Dad would be sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and reports already dressed for work, already mentally deployed somewhere that didn't remind him of what we'd lost. My father's jaw tightens, but he doesn't interrupt. He knows this story is true even if he's never heard it from my perspective. So I'd make my own breakfast, pack my own lunch, walk to school alone, and spend the day surrounded by people who knew my mother had died but didn't know what to say. Teachers who spoke in careful, quiet voices, friends who avoided mentioning their own mothers because they thought it might upset me. I pause, remembering the suffocating weight of everyone's careful consideration. And then I'd come home to a house where nobody talked about anything real, where dinner conversation consisted of logistics and schedule coordination, where the only emotional communication was the silence between words nobody was brave enough to speak. "We were dealing with our own grief," Garrison says quietly. "I know," I reply. "I understood that even then. But understanding why you abandoned me emotionally doesn't change the fact that you did. And when a 14-year-old realizes that the people supposed to guide her through the worst experience of her life are too damaged to help, she has to find guidance somewhere else." I pull out my phone, scrolling to a photo I've carried for years but never shown anyone. Our old house taken from the backyard, showing the small window of what used to be my bedroom. "This is where I learned my first real language," I tell them, zooming in on the window. Not the basic Spanish and French from school, but Arabic. From a radio station broadcasting out of Dearborn, Michigan, aimed at the Muslim community there. Both men lean forward, studying the image, as if it might reveal secrets they missed. I'd discovered that late at night I could pick up radio signals from all over the Midwest, immigrant communities broadcasting in their native languages, reading news from home, playing music that carried stories from places I'd never seen, but somehow understood. I swiped to the next image, the old shortwave radio that had belonged to my grandfather, rescued from the basement and hidden in my bedroom closet. "This became my teacher," I explain. Every night I'd tune through frequencies looking for voices speaking languages I didn't recognize. Then I'd spend the next day researching what I'd heard, using the school library to find books about Arabic grammar, Farsi pronunciation, Russian vocabulary. "Why?" my father asks with genuine curiosity. "Because those voices weren't grieving," I tell him. They were talking about daily life, sharing news, connecting with family members thousands of miles away. They were proof that the world was bigger than our kitchen table, that life continued beyond the silence that had swallowed our house. I close the phone, setting it aside as I try to find words for experiences that shaped me in ways I'm still discovering. By the time I was 16, I could understand basic conversations in 6 languages, not because I was particularly gifted, but because I was desperate. I needed voices in my life that weren't careful, weren't walking on eggshells around my grief, weren't afraid to express emotion. "We didn't know," Garrison says. "You didn't want to know," I corrected him, "because knowing would have required acknowledging that your little sister was developing capabilities you couldn't understand or control. It was easier to dismiss it as a phase, a hobby, something I'd grow out of." I stand up, pacing to the small window overlooking the Fort Braxton parking lot. "When I graduated high school, I had 2 choices," I continued. "I could follow the path you'd laid out, community college, maybe a degree in something useful, eventual marriage to someone who'd keep me safely contained within traditional expectations, or I could pursue the thing that had kept me sane for 4 years. "So you chose ROTC," my father says. "I chose the only path I could see that would let me use what I'd learned while still honoring the military tradition that was the only thing left connecting our family," I reply. "I thought if I could prove that languages had military applications, that cultural understanding was a tactical advantage, maybe you'd finally see value in what I'd been building." "But we didn't," Garrison admits. "You actively fought against it," I corrected him. "Every achievement was dismissed, every opportunity questioned, every advancement treated as evidence that I was moving further away from what you thought I should be, instead of closer to what I was actually capable of becoming." The day I graduated college, walking across that stage with honors in linguistics and a commission in military intelligence, you know what I was thinking about. That 14-year-old girl listening to Arabic radio in her bedroom, wondering if her family would ever understand that she wasn't running away from them. She was running towards something that would make her worthy of their pride. 3 weeks pass before I see either of them again. 3 weeks of returning to my temporary assignment in Germany, of debriefing sessions with DIA oversight, of carefully worded reports that explain the Syrian breach, without revealing the personal dimensions of the security failure. The answer comes in an encrypted email sent through official channels bearing the digital signature of Colonel Thaddeus Lane, Technical Advisor, retired. Request immediate meeting with DIA Deputy Director Harrison. Subject voluntary disclosure regarding security breach in Syrian operations, September 2023. Will provide full testimony regarding approval procedures for Project Alto encryption systems. Personal responsibility acknowledged. I read the message 3 times, trying to process what it means. In military culture, voluntary disclosure of personal fault is career suicide. For a retired officer, it's reputational destruction. For a man who's spent 40 years building a legacy based on competence and integrity, it's ritual suicide within professional bounds. But he's doing it anyway. The meeting takes place at DIA headquarters in Washington, in one of the secure conference rooms where careers are made and ended with equal efficiency. I'm not invited, conflict of interest, but I receive a sanitized summary through official channels. Colonel Lane presents himself at 0800 hours sharp, wearing dress uniform with full decorations, carrying a briefcase containing every document related to his consulting work over the past 5 years. He waives his right to legal representation and requests that the entire proceeding be recorded. His statement is brief, precise, and devastating to his own reputation. "I approved the Redshore Analytics contract without conducting adequate due diligence on their technical capabilities or security protocols. I relied on personal recommendations from trusted sources rather than following established vetting procedures. My failure to properly evaluate this contractor created vulnerabilities that directly led to the compromise of classified operations and endangered the life of DIA assets in the field. The consequences are immediate and severe. His security clearance is permanently revoked. His consulting contracts are terminated. His access to military facilities is restricted to ceremonial events only. His professional reputation, built over 4 decades of honorable service, is effectively destroyed. But he doesn't fight it. According to the summary, he sits through the entire disciplinary proceeding with military bearing intact, accepting each sanction as appropriate consequence for failures he freely acknowledges. The only request he makes is that his daughter's name be kept out of all official records related to the investigation. 2 days later, I receive another encrypted message, this one from Lieutenant Colonel Garrison Lane. "Effective immediately, Special Operations Command will implement enhanced cultural and linguistic training for all personnel deployed to sensitive areas. Program will emphasize the tactical value of cultural intelligence and regional language capabilities. Request DIA consultation on curriculum development. Personal recommendation, Serafina Lane, Director of Strategic Cultural Intelligence as lead consultant." It's not an apology. Military officers don't apologize through official channels, but it's acknowledgement, recognition, and most importantly, action taken to ensure that the skills he spent years dismissing are now treated with the respect they deserve. My phone rings that evening while I'm reviewing training materials for my new position. The caller ID shows my father's personal cell phone. "Hello, Dad," I say, not sure what to expect. "I resigned my position with the Defense Advisory Board today," he says, without preamble, his voice carrying the flat tone he uses for official communications. "Effective immediately. They'll announce it as a routine end to consulting arrangements, but we both know better." "I heard about the DIA testimony," I reply carefully. "That was unexpected." "It was necessary," he corrects. "I signed documents that nearly got you killed. There have to be consequences for that kind of failure, regardless of intent." There's a pause before he continues. "I also wanted you to know that I've been reading your operational summaries, the declassified portions that Harrison authorized me to review, the Afghanistan reports, the Ukraine analysis, the counterintelligence assessments from Eastern Europe." Another pause, longer this time. "I had no idea," he says finally. "In 40 years of military service, I never saw intelligence work that demonstrated the kind of strategic impact your cultural analysis has provided. I've been catastrophically wrong about the value of what you do." It's the closest thing to an apology I'm likely to get wrapped in professional assessment rather than personal emotion. But it's also recognition based on evidence rather than family obligation. "Thank you," I say, meaning it more than he'll probably understand. "There's something else," he continues. "I've been contacted by the National Defense University. They want to develop a new curriculum for senior officers focusing on cultural intelligence and non-traditional warfare. They've asked me to recommend someone to head the program." I wait, knowing where this is going, but needing to hear him say it. "I told them to contact you directly, that the best qualified person in the country for that position is someone whose expertise I spent years failing to recognize." The conversation ends soon after with awkward but genuine expressions of mutual respect. It's not warm Hollywood reconciliation, but it's something more valuable, the beginning of an adult relationship based on professional recognition rather than family obligation. 6 months later, I'm standing in front of a classroom at the National Defense University, looking out at 50 senior military officers who represent the future leadership of American defense policy. Today we're going to discuss why cultural intelligence is not just useful, it's essential. I begin. We're going to examine case studies where linguistic analysis prevented international incidents, where cultural understanding saved American lives, and where traditional military approaches would have failed catastrophically. The work continues. The program grows. And for the first time in my adult life, I'm doing it with the support and recognition of the family that raised me. 2 years later, I'm standing on a stage in New York City, looking out at an audience of international diplomats, military leaders, and intelligence professionals gathered for the United Nations Conference on Conflict Prevention. The invitation came through official channels, but the personal meaning goes deeper than professional recognition. "Ladies and gentlemen," I begin, my voice carrying clearly through the assembly hall. "My name is Serafina Lane, and I'm here to talk about the most powerful weapon in America's arsenal, one that costs nothing to deploy, leaves no environmental damage, and has prevented more conflicts than any missile system ever invented." I pause, letting curiosity build in an audience accustomed to presentations about military hardware and defense budgets. That weapon is understanding. Cultural intelligence, the ability to hear what people are really saying, not just the words they're using, but the fears and hopes and needs that drive those words. The presentation draws on a decade of classified operations, now partially declassified for sharing lessons with allied nations. I tell stories of conflicts prevented through careful listening of international crises, resolved through cultural bridge building of American interests, protected not through force, but through patient work of understanding how different societies process information and make decisions. In the audience, I spot familiar faces. General Blackwood, now retired, but still serving as an advisor. Director Chen from NSA nodding approvingly as I describe the intelligence value of linguistic analysis. And in the back row, 2 men in civilian suits who weren't supposed to be here but somehow got security clearance anyway. My father and brother watching their daughter and sister address the United Nations about the value of everything they once dismissed as worthless. The most dangerous translation error, I continue, isn't when we misunderstand enemy communications. It's when families fail to translate love into the language their children need to hear. I caught my father's eye across the crowded auditorium. He nods once, a small gesture that carries the weight of everything we've learned about each other since that ceremony at Fort Braxton changed our understanding of strength service and what it means to protect the people you love. After the presentation during the reception, they approach me near the windows overlooking the East River. "We wanted to be here," Garrison says simply, "to see you in your element, to understand what you built from what we tried to tear down." My father reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out a small box. Inside is his West Point ring, the one he's worn every day for 43 years, the symbol of everything he thought military excellence should look like. "I can't wear this anymore," he explains. "Not after learning how badly I misjudged what military excellence actually means. But I thought maybe you could carry it. As a reminder that strength and service come in forms I was too limited to recognize." I take the ring, feeling its weight, understanding what it means for him to pass along the symbol of his military identity to the daughter he spent decades trying to diminish. "I'm proud of you," he says, the words coming out awkward but genuine. "I should have said that 22 years ago, but I was too afraid of what your strength might cost us. Now I understand that your strength is what's been protecting us all along." We part ways at the UN Plaza, him returning to a retirement spent rebuilding his understanding of what he spent his career believing me, returning to work, that finally has the recognition and support it always deserved. That evening, I sit in my hotel room reviewing applications from military officers who want to join the Cultural Intelligence Program. These are people who understand that modern warfare requires capabilities their traditional training never provided, who recognize that languages and cultural analysis are weapons as important as any in America's arsenal. On the desk beside the applications sits my father's West Point ring, not as a burden or obligation, but as a reminder that redemption is possible, that understanding can replace fear, and that families like military institutions can learn to value strength in all its forms. My phone buzzes with a text message from an unknown number, but the content immediately identifies the sender. "Aunt Sarah, this is Emma Garrison's daughter. I'm starting college next year and want to study linguistics like you did. Dad says you're the best teacher in the family now. Can we talk sometime? I have so many questions about languages and serving your country." I smile, typing back, "Of course. Call me anytime. And Emma, don't let anyone tell you that words aren't weapons. In the right hands at the right moment, they're the most powerful weapons we have." 3 months later, I'm back at Fort Braxton for another ceremony, this one honoring the first graduating class of the Enhanced Cultural Intelligence Program that Garrison established in Special Operations Command. 50 soldiers who've spent 6 months learning that understanding your enemy's language and culture isn't just an advantage, it's essential for mission success in the modern world. As I watch these young soldiers receive their certifications, I think about that 14-year-old girl listening to foreign radio broadcasts in her bedroom, wondering if anyone would ever understand that she wasn't escaping from reality, she was preparing for it. The ceremony concludes with General Blackwood announcing the establishment of the Serafina Lane Center for Strategic Cultural Intelligence, a permanent training facility that will ensure future generations of military personnel understand that strength comes in many forms, that protection sometimes requires letting people grow into their full potential, and that the most important battles are often won with understanding rather than force. After the ceremony, as families gather to congratulate the new graduates, I notice a young soldier approaching hesitantly. She's maybe 22, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're good at something people don't always value. "Ma'am," she says, snapping to attention, "I wanted to thank you. I speak 4 languages, and before this program my commanders saw that as a hobby. Now they see it as a capability that can save lives." "What languages?" I ask. "English, Spanish, Arabic, and Mandarin," she replies proudly. My family immigrated from China when I was 10, and I never forgot our language even when other kids made fun of me for being different. I smile, remembering similar moments from my own childhood, the weight of being different in a world that values conformity. Being different isn't a weakness, I tell her. It's your superpower. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. As she walks away to rejoin her family, I feel a hand on my shoulder. My father, wearing civilian clothes but carrying himself with the dignity of someone who's learned that admitting mistakes takes more courage than hiding them. "She reminds me of someone I used to know," he says quietly. "A little girl who saw the whole world in voices most people couldn't hear, who built bridges to places most people couldn't imagine, who became everything I was too afraid to see." We stand together, watching the young soldiers celebrate with their families, watching the next generation of cultural warriors prepare to serve their country in ways their predecessors never imagined possible. "You know what I've learned," he continues. "The most important translation I ever needed wasn't from a foreign language to English. It was from fear to understanding, from control to support, from the language of protection to the language of pride." The sun is setting behind Fort Braxton's flagpole, casting long shadows across the parade ground where generations of soldiers have learned what it means to serve. But for the first time, I'm watching that sunset with family members who understand that service comes in many forms, that strength has many definitions, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is trust someone you love to become everything they're capable of being. My name is Serafina Lane. I speak 9 languages fluently, but the most important one I ever learned was how to translate my family's love from the language of fear into the language of pride. And that translation, that understanding, has made all the difference.